so much stronger. The King of glory, the King above all kings. Who shakes the whole earth with holy thunder, who leaves his presence in awe and wonder. The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Who brings our chaos back into order, who makes the orphan a son and daughter. The King of glory, the King above all kings. Who rules the nations with truth and justice, shines like the sun in all of his brilliance. The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain, and worthy is the King who conquered the grave, and worthy is the Lamb that was slain, and worthy is the King who conquered the grave, and worthy is the Lamb that was slain, and worthy is the King who conquered the grave, and worthy is the Lamb that was slain. Worthy, worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me.
Hello, welcome to Chelmsford Wood Baptist Church Online. We are online this morning, so if you're outside the building at the moment, sorry. It's another of those awkward moments where no one told you. Hopefully, last week you were in real life and you got a piece of paper that told you when and where we're meeting. So hopefully most of you are here now. So if you are, hello everyone. Now, in case you're wondering why I'm not speaking to anyone specifically, because I'm sure you're all putting in hilarious comments right now, I'm afraid this is another pre-recorded one, which I know isn't quite the same, but if it's any help, I recorded it live. Do you see? I recorded it live. There's an email just come in, so you know it's live, and this isn't just some AI version of me. You can tell it's not because my skin's terrible on this camera, isn't it? And I moisturise. Anyway, if you're joining us for the first time, this is Chelmswood Baptist Church Online. Normally we meet at Three Trees and 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and we sing, pray, talk, ponder the meaning of life, just hang around together, and we try and tune in to God, what God's about, what God's saying to us, and how we can be followers of Jesus. That's kind of what we're about. So welcome. So this morning we're going to play some bits of music. There'll be times to pray and to ponder, and there'll be time to reflect. We're picking up again this season the book of Corinthians. We're going from 1 Corinthians 7, which if you haven't read it, it's a doozy, I think it's known as. Well, it's not really, but the church has used it as one in the past, but we'll get to that in a few moments. Anyway, hopefully I've managed to get one of the deacons to do the deacon's news. So here is the deacon's news.
Good morning and welcome to Chelmsley Wood service online. We are glad that you are able to join us today. This being the first Sunday of the new month of September. We have come into the last month of the year, which end in Mba, except maybe October, which is just over. But September, November, and December all end in Ember. And I want to bring us something from the Bible, which also ends in Mba, and it's from Psalm 121. Last Sunday in church, we celebrated the Psalms, and the congregation was invited to bring some meditation pieces from the Psalms, and it was a very nice time we had. So many different Psalms came up. Today, one of them I want to bring to us is Psalm 121, beginning from verse 2. And it's I'll be using the pronoun that covers all of us instead of one person. Our help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let our feet slip. He who watches over us will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. So as we enter the Ember month, let's add this bit of Ember from the Bible. He who watches over us will neither slumber nor sleep. Thank you.
Thank you, deacon. I wish I'd checked my piece of paper to find out which deacon that was, but hopefully it was someone. If not, I'll probably have to do one myself and pretend I'm a deacon and just give you a short message of hello. I should be doing the birthdays, but I think we'll do that next week now because we're back in real life. In fact, next week in real life, John Froud is with us, but that'll all come up in the notices, which will follow immediately now. Not a huge amount in terms of notices this week. The main thing to note is that John Froud is with us next weekend for the John Froud Weekender, as it's famously known as. We've got a concert on Saturday at 7 o'clock, so that's next Saturday, which is the 10th of September at 7 o'clock at Three Trees. John's joining us to do a concert, and he'll also be leading worship on Sunday morning, which funnily enough is the 11th of September. So hopefully you can join us for those two events. It'd be a nice way to start the season off, really, wouldn't it? Back in real life and celebrating with some music and some time together. Should be a good time. So do come along to that next Saturday if you can, and join us in real life next Sunday at 11. And of course, not forgetting this Thursday, which will be the 8th of September, is our first Thursday. We're back in the routine. I know technically it's the second Thursday, but we'll disregard last week. This Thursday, if you can, join us for communion at 7 o'clock. For First Thursday communion, that'll be in the chapel at Three Trees. So that's a communion. It's about an hour. We spend time in prayer and we share bread and wine together. So if you can come along on Thursday night at 7 o'clock, join us for communion this Thursday evening. And that's the notices. Let's get back to the plot. Well, we picked a corker for this one, haven't we? This is 1 Corinthians 7. Now, I started reading it, and then I started taking notes, and then I thought, well, probably the best thing to do is to walk ourselves through it. Now, there's a lot in this chapter, so we'll kind of see how we get on, I think is probably the best approach to take here. First of all, as I often say, whenever you read the Bible, what's important is context, because people will often take a verse. We've talked about this previously. They'll take a verse and they will bash people with it. Usually they'll take a verse that suits them and their understanding of the world and the universe, and they'll use that to try and get everyone to agree with them. Now, the Bible is not meant to be used like that, funnily enough. The Bible is the unfolding story of God's revelation to the human race. And whilst there are specific instructions, a couple of times here Paul says, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you my thoughts and my advice on it. So we have to take that into context as well. And another thing, well, one of the many things we have to take into context is how times have changed. And this isn't about saying, well, they're not like they used to be. In many respects, human beings haven't changed at all in what they get up to. Not just in and out the bedroom, but everywhere. Humans haven't changed that much. But the world we live in has. We have better technology now. We know more about how humans work, about psychology and physiology. We know more about just how the whole world hangs together. Which is why a lot of the Old Testament stuff, well, you can understand where they're coming from, but some of those rules just don't apply. And particularly for us as Christians, because our verse of the Old Testament is a Christianized version of it. And we have to read it all through the lens of Jesus. Jesus is always the touchstone. Jesus is always the one we return to. And whenever we read something in the Bible, you measure it against what Jesus says. That doesn't mean you chuck stuff out, but you understand it in the light of Jesus, because Jesus, as we believe it, is the ultimate revelation of who and what God is about. Everything else, everyone else is flawed. So we look at what Jesus said. So having put those, are they called caveats, in place, let's take a look. Now the first thing with chapter 7, I say I'm not going to read it all because that's a lot of it. The first thing is that this is the response to a question. Paul says, now getting down to the questions you asked in your letter to me. First, he says, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? I left a gap there for you to make your own answer, because people will have different answers to that. I know we live in a very sexualized society, don't we? I mean, it's interesting when you look at our culture now. There's images everywhere, and in almost every story, every film, every TV show, almost everything, it's sexualized, and there's things going on. And we have to understand that that's the culture we're in. But this is nothing new. You look at some of the ancient cultures, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and then you go into the, well, I know we're jumping centuries at a time here, the medieval period. It's really quite saucy. You look at some of the Shakespearean stuff, there's a lot going on there. So in a sense, human beings are no different, really. We enjoy what we've always enjoyed as human beings, but there are different kind of takes on this, and people have different understandings. So we need to see it in that light and not be judgmental on people who have different attitudes, different drives, and different needs. So we have to understand that. Now, this isn't a kind of, well, it doesn't matter what you do, anyone can do anything. That's not what I'm saying. It's not what the Bible's saying. What it's saying is understand first. And then decide, well, is this something that is fundamental? Is this something about me and my culture or my upbringing or my experiences? Because we are all different people. So Paul says, and this is where I would go along with him, he'll be pleased to know, is that it's about context. It is, he says, within a certain context. And the context that Paul talks about is marriage, which is a whole new can of worms. I mean, basically this is it's a shed load of worms in the whole of this chapter. Because when people talk about marriage, and Christians today talk about marriage as though marriage has always been a man and a woman get married in a church and that's it. That's a relatively recent invention. We have a cultural, particularly Western understanding of what marriage is. But there's many types of marriage. And again, we have to make judgments on whether we think they're right or not, whether we find them acceptable. And we have to work out for ourselves whether actually, is that just because I don't like it? It's not just my experience. There's polygamy, isn't there? And there's gay marriage, and there's people that remarry, and there's divorce. There's all these things that people have different takes on depending on where they're coming from, what they've been brought up to, what their faith is. I think this is one of the moments you return to Jesus and say, what did Jesus do? And I would say Jesus understood people. And Jesus was concerned, well, what is good? What helps you grow? What respects both you and the other person? And those, I would say, are the two key elements. Does your behavior, your relationship respect you and your body and your spirit? And does it respect the other person? Because any relationship where someone's taking or someone has control, well, then it starts to get unhealthy. So anyway, we haven't got very far, have we? I think we're in the first half of the first verse. What he talks about here, I'll keep reading. It's good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. Well, that much hasn't changed. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy his wife, the wife seeking to satisfy his husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or out. In case you're wondering, I'm using the Message translation, which is pretty good, puts it into how we speak more. Abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it, and if it's for the purposes of prayer and fasting, but only for such times. Then come back together again. So he's saying, actually, don't use sex as a weapon. It's not to be used to control or manipulate the other person. It's a mutual thing. And this is what marriage is, isn't it? Marriage is about that kind of love and respect for the other person. And it is, Paul says, about giving yourself to someone else. This is why I don't rate marriage. What's the word I'm looking for? This is where I hold marriage in high regard. And by that, I don't mean two people get married in a nice, church in the countryside. I mean any relationship between two people that is mutual, is exclusive, and is supportive of one another. Because that, you give yourself to one another, so you learn to love and to trust. You create an environment where you can be who you truly are and grow to be who you truly can be. And that's what Paul's talking about. And Paul, he's answering a question specifically about sex. But he's talking actually about the whole of any marriage relationship. So he's saying, don't control the other person by withholding yourself from them. And I would say in any way, marriage is about opening yourself up. And it is vulnerable. it is dangerous when you do that, particularly when marriages go wrong, when the other person abuses that trust. You've opened yourself up to them and you are vulnerable and you can get hurt. Paul goes on to say, sometimes I wish everyone was single like me, a simpler life in many ways, but celibacy is not for everyone any more than marriage is. God gives the gift of the single life to some and the gift of the married to others. So he's saying actually there isn't a single right way to be, because we are different people with different needs and drives. So Paul talks about, and I suggest the best way to do this is to read this, preferably when I've finished, so you got some context, but you can stop and come back to this later if you want. But Paul's talking about, well, where does God want you to be? And how can you honour that place you are and live in a way that honours yourself in that place that you are? So he talks about in verses 8 onwards, I tell the unmarried widows that singleness might well be the best thing for them, as it has been for me. But if they can't manage their desires and emotions, they should by all means go ahead and get married. He says that the difficulties of marriage are preferable by far to a sexually tortured life as a single. So he's saying actually a marriage isn't the perfect solution either. But for some people it does resolve things. It's about companionship as well as all the physical stuff and the support. It's about that kind of having someone else around, having that support and that network around you automatically. And he's not denigrating, he's not putting down being single, because he was single himself. So he knows that for some people that is the best way. Because sometimes in our society it's like, well, they're not got married, they're a bit funny, aren't they? And that's not true either, because we are different people. So I think what Paul's talking about in answer to their specific question in Corinth, and you remember Corinth was a very diverse and colourful place. Paul's saying the way to grow as a person and to serve God is to do that in a relationship where you can trust and be trusted, where you know you're safe, where you can give of yourself. But also the mutuality of that is you also have responsibility then for someone else. You can learn to love as well as how to be loved. He says, if you're married, stay married. Now, again, this isn't talking about divorce either. If you're in a relationship that's broken down or is abusive, get out of it. He's saying, because of the question at this point was, well, I'm married to someone who's not a Christian, should I leave them? No, he says. I think later on he does, but he says you can. But he's saying, well, actually, if your relationship's working, why would you want to lose that? Because our God is the God of love. And if there is love there, why would you destroy that just for the sake of your religion? For the rest of you who are in mixed marriages, Christian marriage and non-Christian, we have no explicit command from the master. See, no explicit command. This is what you must do. Basically says, read it yourself. He says, stay together. If you can stay together, then stay together. Because that is the way you can grow. You grow in trust. There's no other way of developing in a relationship other than staying there. That's true of marriage, it's true of friendships, it's true of workplaces, it's true of communities. The only way you really grow and strengthen and put down roots is staying put. If you just go from one thing to the next, thinking it might be better next time, it might be better over there, it might be better if I move, it might be better if I get a different job, it might be better if I get a different partner. That is no way to live. That is just always being on the move. So he talks about if you have a spouse that walks out on you, he says, don't hang on. Don't hold on desperately for that. You don't have to hold on desperately. God has called us to make the best of it as peacefully as we can. So he's saying actually behave with dignity. And this is where the respect for yourself comes through. If someone's going to walk out on you, Paul is saying, kind of let them go. Let them work it out. Just don't be wishing you were someplace else or with somewhere else. And here's a good line. Where you are right now is God's place for you. And that's true wherever you are in terms of relationships or in terms of of friendships, or kind of pretty much anywhere. It's about living in this moment. God has put you here and now. That doesn't mean we can't dream and plan and know that we're going to move on. But actually where you are now is important, because that is all you have. So he then goes on to talk a bit about faith, because he says, were you Jewish at the time God called you? Don't try to remove the evidence. Were you non-Jewish at the time of your call? Don't become a Jew. Being Jewish isn't the point. The important thing is obeying God's call and following his commands. So he's saying, actually, God calls you from where you are. Don't deny your past or pretend it never happened or try and remove that evidence. Don't deny it. Because who you are is partly a result of where you've been and who you've been. We all change and grow, we all make mistakes, and we make good choices, and they help grow us into who we are, and that's true in our relationships as well. If you move on to verses 29 on, he says, I do want to point out, friends, that time is of the essence. There's no time to waste, so don't complicate your lives unnecessarily. Keep it simple in marriage, grief, joy, whatever. Even in the ordinary things, your daily routines of shopping and so on, deal sparingly as possible with the things the world thrusts on you. The world as you see it is on its way out. He then goes on to talk about how you make the most of where you are. And he's talking really here. It is that, well, God's put you right where you are right now. So serve God there. That's the place you're in. Now, in terms of marriage and relationships, which this isn't really a lecture on marriage and relationships, but in terms of that, it's not saying you should stay together at all costs. We've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. People who are in relationships that are toxic, that are hurtful. God wouldn't want that to continue. If it doesn't look like things are going to get healed, if one or both of the partners see no future, well, hard as it is, and I know there are cases when things turn around, hard as it is, move on. Because God doesn't want us standing still as human beings and as his servants. He then talks about what happens if someone dies in the partnership. And again, the church has used this to as a rule. See, Paul says a wife must stay with her husband as long as he lives. If he dies, she's free to marry whoever she chooses. She will, of course, want to marry a believer and have the blessing of the master. But by now, you know that I think she'll be better off staying single. The master, in my opinion, thinks so too. Well, I'm glad we had that chapter. Anyway, but what he's saying, because again, you look at context here, Paul is saying, because Paul's belief at this point was Jesus was due back like any moment, like tomorrow, like in an hour's time. So don't go around changing or complicating your lives. Live ready for Jesus to come back. Now we are living 2,000 years later. Now I'm not denying Jesus might come back in the next hour or the next week or the next month. We don't know. But there's this balance between getting your life right now or planning, a very complicated life. And actually then you kind of end up tying yourself up in knots over it. So in terms of marriage, to summarise that quite ragged and random sermon, I would suggest you read 1 Corinthians 7 because it is interesting. One of the interesting things in terms of how we read the Bible is that Paul says, this is my opinion, this is what I think. Jesus didn't teach very much on marriage at all. He did have a few conversations around it, but Jesus' emphasis is always on good relations, and it's always on doing the right and the honourable thing. And that should be true in our relationships. Whatever they are, whether they're marriage or friendships or families or church family, whatever that might be, what's important is the honour that we show to other people and also the honour we show to ourselves. Remember Jesus' teaching, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, body and spirit, and love your neighbour as you love yourself. So in any marriage, look after yourself and look after the other person. That's how we honour God in any relationship. And if you're watching this and you feel bad, particularly Christians often have guilt trips. Well, I think non-Christians do as well, about why relationships perhaps break down, where things go wrong. Well, remember that our God is the God of new beginnings. God didn't set out this tight system of rules that we have to follow in our relationships, whatever the cost. God called us to grow as his children, and God wants what's best for his children. If we had children in a relationship that was unhealthy, we would want them to leave it. And God would feel the same way. If we're in a relationship where things are going well, God would say, well, keep going with that, keep working on that. And when you hit bumps in the road, work your way through them. Talk it through, learn to love. This is the gift of marriage, is that place where you can learn to love and to be loved. And I say this a lot. I say this in our wedding ceremonies that I do. My main point usually in wedding ceremonies, the polite version, is don't screw it up. Don't think the grass is greener. Don't think life could be better. Now, in some cases, yes, that is true. But in most cases in marriages, things get better the longer you stay together. So God does love marriage because God loves a love story. Because the Bible, when you read it right, the Bible is God's great love story between him and us. It's not by mistake, I don't think, that in Revelation 21, it talks about Jesus being there and the heavenly city and like a bride ready and dressed to meet her husband. The church is the bride of Christ. God loves a love story. So whatever your relationship status is on Facebook at the moment, whether you feel you've failed in the past or whether you've been hurt in the past, God says, well, that was the past. Live in the now, where God has put you now. And if you're in a good and a strong and a healthy marriage, good. Grow in that, stay in that, work on that. Be determined to grow to be the best partner you can. And if you're not, well, go with that too. Grow to be the best, strongest, most love-filled person you can be, whoever and whatever you are, and whoever and whatever your relationships. And remember that all of us, as part of the church, we are all, and here's a good thing for the 21st century, isn't it? All of us are the bride of Christ as part of his church. So there we go. There's a quick walkthrough, 1 Corinthians 7, teaching on marriage. If you want to talk about this further, get in touch and we'll have a conversation about it. And if you feel you've been in a relationship that's hurtful and you don't quite know which way to turn, what to do with that, then talk that through as well. Because God is the God of healing and of new beginnings. So be where God has put you now. Don't try and be anything different. And look to grow to be the best disciple of Christ you can be. And all of us look to be filled with his love and share that love with others. Amen. Well, I'm not sure how you felt about all that, but let's talk about it. We're in the business of growing as human beings because that's our call as a disciple, because God has made us in his image, male and female. He made us, all of us, human beings. In fact, whatever and whoever we are made in God's image. There's a spark of God in us. So let's talk about it. If you think, well, actually, I need to undo this knot that's in here somewhere, let's talk that through. We're going to spend a bit of time in prayer. I'm going to play a video of some calming scenes or something. I haven't quite decided yet, but I'm sure it'll happen fairly shortly. And during that time, feel free to put your prayers into the chat. Now, there may be some confusion if the internet Facebook thing isn't working quite how it used to, so I don't know how that works. But put your prayers in anyway, and as people see them, they'll join you in their prayers. So let's spend a bit of time in prayer.
the highest will I was lost, but he brought me. Oh, his love, his love, Whom the sun sets free, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, he has ransomed, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Fallen from Father's house, yes a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Chosen, not forsaken, I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. All time I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. The sun sets free, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. My Father's house is a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. My Father's house is a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am.
Now, I don't want to preempt our season, but I'm going to close with some words from later on in the book of Corinthians, because I think for me, all of the book of Corinthians is summed up in this kind of chapter. Paul talks about all kinds of ways of being the church and how to follow Jesus, and he gives his views and he gives his take on what Jesus said and the teachings that you find through scriptures. But for me, this kind of sums it up. And for me, actually, of all the letters, this is the best bit. I'm a big fan of the stories of Jesus, the Gospels. And in second place is this reading from 1 Corinthians. So I'm going to leave you with this. Then we'll play a song to take us out of our time together this morning. So here we go. So whatever your relationships have been, and whatever they're going to be, this is the best way. If I speak with human eloquence and angelic ecstasy but don't love, I'm nothing but the creaking of a rusty gate. If I speak God's word with power, revealing all his mysteries and making everything plain as day, And if I have faith that says to a mountain, jump, and it jumps, but I don't love, I'm nothing. If I give everything I own to the poor and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr, but I don't love, I've got nowhere. So no matter what I say, what I believe, and what I do, I'm bankrupt without love. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it hasn't got. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others, isn't always me first, doesn't fly off the handle, doesn't keep a score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel. It takes pleasure in the flowering of truth. It puts up with anything and trusts God always. Always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love never dies. Inspired speech will be over someday, praying in tongues will end, understanding will reach its limit. We know only a portion of the truth. What we say about God is always incomplete, but when the complete arrives, our incompletenesses will be cancelled. When I was an infant, I gurgled and cooed like an infant. When I grew up, I left those infant ways for good. We don't yet see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog, peering through a mist, but it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then, see it as clearly as God sees us, knowing him directly, just as he knows us. But for right now, until that completeness, we have three things to lead us towards that consummation. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, love extravagantly. And the best of the three is love. God bless. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Don't forget to join us, if you can, on Saturday night at 7 to hear John Froud in concert, and then on Sunday morning at 11. So we'll see you then. Take care and God bless.
God so loved the world he had created that he gave his one and only Son. God so loved the world he had created that he gave his one and only Son. He gave his only Son, Jesus. He gave his only Son, Jesus. So whoever believes in his Son Jesus shall not die, but live forevermore. So whoever believes in his Son Jesus shall not die, but live forevermore.
He gave his only Son, Jesus. He gave his only Son, Jesus. His only Son, Jesus,
that believes